Welcome to this TubeDuel original podcast explainer. Today, we're looking at a story full of tragic irony. For most of the 20th century, Kodak basically was photography. They were an absolute powerhouse. They literally invented the future of their industry. And then, well, they completely lost it.
Okay, let's dive right into this. Who do you think invented the very first digital camera? I mean, you'd probably guess a modern tech giant, right? Maybe Sony, Apple, or Canon? But the real answer? It's probably gonna surprise you. The answer is actually a 24-year-old Kodak engineer, way back in 1975. His name was Steven Sasson. So our story kicks off right in the middle of a Kodak lab. Picture this. It's December 1975, and Sasson walks into a conference room carrying this machine he just threw together from spare parts. Without even realizing it, he had just created the future of photography.
Now, what's really wild is just how primitive this first device actually was. It weighed 8 pounds. That's like carrying around a gallon of milk. And get this, it took 23 seconds just to capture one tiny 0.01 megapixel black and white image onto a cassette tape. But Sasson, he knew exactly what he had. He looked at his bosses and told them digital cameras would be ready for everyday consumers in about 15 to 20 years. And honestly, he hit the nail on the head. So how did those Kodak executives react to this game-changing invention? They literally gave him this exact response. That's cute, but don't tell anyone about it. Yeah, no way, right? They actually saw the future sitting right there on the table, but they chose to bury it instead of embracing it. So why in the world would they do that?
Section 1. Protecting the film empire. Why Kodak feared the future.
To really understand their fear, we have to look at how they made their money. And it comes down to a massive number. $8 billion. Every single year, Kodak's traditional film business, the film, the processing, the special paper, it was an $8 billion money-making machine. For the folks at Kodak, every single digital photo taken just meant one less roll of film sold. So to them, digital technology didn't feel like a huge opportunity. It felt like a terrible threat to their perfectly comfortable business.
Let's track how this failure actually built up over time. So, 1975, Kodak invents the digital camera. They own all the key patents, but they hesitate. Fast forward to 1991, they finally release a commercial digital camera, but get this, it costs $13,000. Then, by the year 2000, the first camera phone drops in Japan. Kodak's window to dominate is shrinking fast. And then finally, by 2012, Kodak goes completely bankrupt. They literally had a 20-year head start on the whole world, but they just let the clock run out.
Section 2. The Decision Stack, a framework for failure. To figure out exactly why they failed, we can use something called the Decision Stack. It has 6 levels: vision, strategy, product strategy, principles, discovery, and delivery. Now, in a successful company, all of these steps line up perfectly. They all work together. But Kodak? They suffered from some serious, deep misalignment across every single level. Their decisions just did not connect with each other.
And these right here were Kodak's fatal hidden principles. First, their main goal was always to protect their existing film revenue. Second, they optimized for short-term, quarterly earnings instead of focusing on long-term growth. Third, they chose tiny, incremental, safe steps over transformational changes. And finally, they defended their past instead of learning to move forward. Basically, they tried to force this amazing, brand new digital technology into an old, dying business model, and it just didn't work.
Section 3. The Big Contrast. How Fujifilm Survived.
Now, this is where it gets super interesting. Fujifilm faced the exact same digital disruption as Kodak at the exact same time, but they had a totally different mindset. Kodak's unwritten rule was basically protect the present, but Fujifilm, their goal was to reimagine the future. They looked around and realized that traditional photography might not survive at all, so they made an incredibly brave choice. They decided to actively destroy their own film business in order to create a brand new company.
Here's exactly how they pulled that off. First, Fujifilm audited all of their existing technologies, and they actually found 70 different transferable capabilities. They asked themselves a simple question: what can we do with what we already know? So they took their deep knowledge of making X-ray film and expanded straight into the healthcare industry. They even took 70 years of chemical and collagen research and used it to create a super successful cosmetics line. Talk about a pivot, right? They cleverly used their old skills to build entirely new product categories.
Section 4. The Financial Fall. The Cost of Misalignment.
Meanwhile, back over at Kodak, their refusal to adapt came with a truly devastating cost. Think about this. In the mid-1990s, Kodak's film revenue was sitting at a massive $8 billion. But as digital cameras started going mainstream, which, remember, is the very technology that Kodak themselves invented, their film revenue completely crashed. By 2010, it had plummeted down to under $400 million.
And that leads us right to this tragic outcome. On January 19, 2012, Kodak officially filed for Chapter 11 bankruptcy. Basically, the company had completely failed and run out of money. It's kind of hard to believe, but one of the most famous, iconic brands in the entire world was ultimately destroyed by its very own invention.
Section 5. A new chapter. Kodak's recent pivots. Now, Kodak didn't just disappear forever. They actually emerged from bankruptcy back in 2013 and rebranded themselves to focus heavily on commercial digital printing. They also kept up their supply of traditional film for big Hollywood movies, which is pretty cool. But what's really fascinating here is that in 2020, they received a government loan to shift their focus into making pharmaceutical materials. So they finally made that big pivot into healthcare, a move their main rival Fujifilm had already made successfully many years earlier.
Section 6. The ultimate lesson. Innovation is organizational.
So what should you actually take away from this whole story? I think it really comes down to this one idea. Technology doesn't disrupt companies. Misalignment does. Think about it. Kodak had the absolute best technology in the game. They held all the patents. They literally had a 20-year head start on everyone else. But they still failed, simply because their organization was not aligned. That fatal lack of connection across their vision, their strategy, and their principles. That's what actually killed them.
Which leaves us with this final question to chew on. Are you protecting your past, or are you building your future? Seriously, take a second and think about how this applies to your own life, maybe your career or even your business. When the world changes around you, do you hold on to what's safe and comfortable, or do you step up and reimagine what's possible? Thank you so much for joining me for this explainer, and hey, keep building your future.